The desert sun was ruthless, high above and merciless, bleaching the sky and burning everything beneath it. On a wooden platform in the middle of the dry, cracked earth, a powerful black stallion lay bound, ropes tight around his legs. His flanks rose and fell with shallow, panicked breaths. His teeth were bared, eyes wide and wild, as he struggled against the restraints. Dust clung to his slick coat. The sound of his hooves scraping the wood echoed like thunder in the dead silence. This was Iron Smoke, feared by many, misunderstood by all. Beside him stood Cyrus Blackthorn, his mouth set in a grim line. His long leather vest was caked with dirt, his hat shadowing a face carved by time and bitterness. In one hand he gripped a cleaver, thick and stained, in the other a coiled rope. He looked at the horse not with cruelty, but with cold finality. The decision had already been made. "Can't let a beast like this live," he muttered to no one in particular. "Not after what he did." The stillness shattered with a scream. "Stop! Don't touch him!" A young woman burst through the heat haze, her cream dress whipping against her legs as she ran. Her name was Jolene Ashford, and fear had no place in her eyes, only fury. Her boots kicked up sand as she sprinted toward the platform, her voice tearing through the air again. "Let him go, Cyrus." Her words trembled with urgency. Behind her, far in the distance, Everett Malloy stumbled to catch up, waving his arms in warning, but she didn't slow down. Jolene reached the platform and dropped to her knees beside Iron Smoke, pressing a hand to his trembling neck. "You're hurting him," she whispered, eyes glistening as she looked up at Cyrus. "This isn't justice. You're just trying to erase a mistake." The horse didn't fight her touch. He simply looked at her, like he knew her voice, like it brought him back from the edge. There was something haunting in his stillness. Cyrus's jaw clenched. "He killed a man, Jolene. You want to argue with that?" He raised the cleaver slightly, but didn't swing. The wind had picked up, carrying Jolene's scent, her defiance, her heart. Iron Smoke didn't thrash. He watched. Waited. Breathing her in. Jolene stood slowly, her eyes locked on Cyrus, her voice low but shaking with power. "Then kill me too." The silence that followed Jolene's words was so complete, it felt like the entire desert had paused to listen. Cyrus Blackthorn lowered the cleaver just slightly, the weight of it dragging against his side as his eyes narrowed on her. His mouth twitched with something unspoken, conflict, maybe even guilt, but he didn't move. The stallion, Iron Smoke, remained still as stone, his breath steadying under Jolene's hand. She had drawn a line in the dust, and everyone present knew it. If Cyrus swung, he would destroy more than just a horse. From behind them, Everett Malloy finally reached the platform, panting hard. Sweat ran down his neck, and he held his hands up in caution. "Cyrus," he said, trying to steady his breath, "let's think this through. This ain't how we solve things anymore. Not like in the old days." He glanced at Jolene with worry, then at Iron Smoke. "What if she's right? What if we're wrong about the horse?" Cyrus looked between them, jaw tight, lips thin. He had lived through droughts, cattle raids, and more funerals than he could count. In his world, mercy wasn't a luxury, it was a weakness. But something about the way Jolene stood there, unshaking in front of him, stirred an unease in his gut. His fingers loosened around the cleaver. "I don't have time for fairy tales," he muttered, turning his back and walking a few steps away. "You want to save the beast? Then he's your responsibility now." Jolene's breath caught. Relief and dread mixed in her chest. She had won, for now, but the weight of what she had taken on settled like iron on her shoulders. She looked down at Iron Smoke. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and wounded. Not just physically, but deeply, somewhere unreachable. "You're safe now," she whispered, unsure if she believed it herself. "I won't let them touch you again." Everett moved to untie the ropes, his hands trembling. "You realize the whole town's gonna lose their minds when they hear about this," he said softly. "Especially after what happened to Tobias Grimsley." The name hung in the air like a ghost. Iron Smoke flinched at the sound of it. Jolene didn't respond. Her eyes stayed on the horizon, where heat shimmered and secrets waited. She didn't know yet what had truly happened to Tobias Grimsley, but something in her bones told her Iron Smoke did. And whatever it was, it hadn't been his fault. The wind picked up that night. Not a storm, but something colder, restless. The kind that whispered through the trees and carried stories with it. Jolene stood just outside the old barn on Declan Holtgrave's ranch, where she had been given permission to keep Iron Smoke, far from the judging eyes of town. The stallion stood inside, pacing slowly, his head low, ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound. He hadn't eaten much. He hadn't slept at all. Jolene's hands trembled as she poured water into a rusted tin bowl. Her thoughts kept circling back to the same moment, Cyrus's face when she defied him, the way Iron Smoke had responded to her voice, and the name Everett had said out loud, Tobias Grimsley. The town believed Iron Smoke had killed him, but something about that didn't sit right. Tobias had been a seasoned ranch hand, not the type to get careless. And Iron Smoke, there was no rage in him, just fear. Deep, paralyzing fear. Inside the barn, Iron Smoke suddenly let out a sharp snort, ears pinned. Jolene stepped in cautiously, her boots crunching over hay. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's just me." But his eyes weren't on her. He was staring at the far corner of the barn, where a thin shaft of moonlight cut through the boards. He didn't blink. He didn't move. Jolene turned to look, but saw nothing, just shadows and dust. She sighed and stepped closer, reaching a hand to stroke his neck. "What happened to you?" she murmured. "What are you trying to remember?" His skin flinched under her touch. Then, slowly, his head turned toward her, and something flickered in his eyes. A flash of something that looked like recognition, or warning. The barn door creaked open behind her. Jolene turned fast, startled. Maribel Crowhurst stepped inside, her lantern casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. "I heard you brought him here," she said, her voice low and tight. "You should have let Cyrus do what needed to be done. That horse, he's cursed, Jolene. You weren't here the night Tobias died." Jolene swallowed hard. "Then tell me what happened," she said, stepping between Maribel and the stallion. "Because I don't believe the story everyone keeps repeating." Maribel stared at her for a long moment, then looked past her, into Iron Smoke's eyes. "You shouldn't have brought him back here," she whispered. "Some things are meant to stay buried." Maribel's words clung to Jolene's mind like dust on sweat. "Some things are meant to stay buried." That sentence played over and over as she sat on a bale of hay hours later, staring at Iron Smoke under the dim lantern light. The stallion had finally lain down, but his eyes never closed. He watched the door, the shadows, the silence. Jolene had seen trauma in animals before, but this wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, like the horse was guarding a memory too painful to forget. The next morning, Jolene rode into town alone, keeping her head down as she passed townsfolk already whispering. The news had spread fast. Cyrus hadn't killed the horse, and Jolene had taken him in. At the general store, Tamsin Coleridge stood behind the counter, arms crossed, jaw tight. "You're braver than smart, Jolene," she said without looking up. "That horse will bring nothing but grief." Jolene didn't respond. She just paid for the oats and left, but not before Tamsin added under her breath, "You should ask Declan what he saw that night." The name hit like a spark. Declan Holtgrave had been working the same ranch as Tobias. If anyone knew the truth, it was him. That evening, Jolene walked the half-mile across dry pasture to Declan's shack. He opened the door slowly, one boot unlaced, a cigarette between his fingers. "You come here for answers," he said without her asking. "Everyone does, sooner or later." He stepped aside to let her in, his shoulders slumped like a man carrying too much history. Inside, the air smelled of tobacco, old leather, and regret. Declan poured a drink and sat across from her. "Tobias died 2 months ago. We found him face down in the north field, chest crushed. Iron Smoke was nearby, breathing heavy, shaking like he'd seen the devil. Town blamed the horse." Easy answer. He took a long sip. "But I was there an hour before. I saw Tobias hit him. Hard. Over and over. He said the horse was wild and needed to learn fear." Jolene's stomach turned. "So Iron Smoke fought back?" Declan shook his head slowly. "No. That's the part that won't leave me. Iron Smoke never moved. Just stood there. Wouldn't even look at Tobias. It wasn't until after I left that, whatever happened, happened." He looked her dead in the eye. "You think you're helping that horse. But the truth is, he remembers things we don't want to." Outside, the wind began to howl again, stirring the dirt. And back at the barn, Iron Smoke raised his head and stared at the horizon, as if something he feared was getting closer. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Jolene lay on a cot inside the barn, eyes fixed on the rafters as the wind whispered through the cracks in the wood. Iron Smoke stood near the door, unmoving, ears twitching every so often like he was listening to voices she couldn't hear. There was something in the air, heavy, like a storm building in silence. Jolene sat up, drawn to him again. "What really happened out there?" she whispered. "And why is everyone so afraid of you?" Earlier that day, she had returned to the north field, the place where Tobias Grimsley had died. The grass there grew different, uneven, like the ground hadn't forgotten what it witnessed. She found a split rail where a rope had once been tied, and nearby, something half buried beneath the soil, a rusted buckle snapped clean in half. It didn't belong to a saddle. It looked human. Jolene's heart pounded as she realized this wasn't just a tragic accident. There was a struggle, one no one wanted to talk about. As she brushed the dirt off her hands, she heard a voice behind her. "You shouldn't be here." It was Evelyn Rourke, Tobias's widow. Her eyes were sunken, her skin pale and tight like she hadn't slept since the day he died. She stepped forward slowly, like each step cost her something. "Tobias wasn't the man people think he was," she said, staring at the field like it still held him. "He had a temper, especially with animals, especially when he drank." Jolene held her breath. "Did he hurt Iron Smoke?" Evelyn's voice cracked. "He beat that horse near to death 3 times. Called it training." Her eyes welled with tears, but her voice turned sharp. But what happened that night wasn't about the horse. There was someone else out there. Someone who wanted Tobias gone. The words sank in like a stone in water. Jolene looked at the field again, and this time it felt less like a place of tragedy and more like a crime scene. She turned to ask Evelyn who she meant, but the woman was already walking away, her hands shaking. "Be careful who you trust," she called back. "This town hides things." Back at the barn, Iron Smoke finally lay down, curling his legs beneath him, eyes half closed. Jolene moved closer, resting her hand gently on his shoulder. "You saw it all, didn't you?" she murmured. "You saw who really did it." And in the silence that followed, Iron Smoke let out a low, trembling breath, almost like an answer. The next morning brought no peace. Jolene stood outside the barn, the sky above her painted in soft grays. The kind of sky that promised nothing but waiting. Iron Smoke grazed silently nearby, calmer now, but watchful. Always watchful. Jolene's thoughts were heavy with Evelyn's words. Someone wanted Tobias gone. The phrase echoed louder than thunder. And now she had to ask herself a question more dangerous than all the others. Who had the most to gain from his death? The name that returned to her again and again was Cyrus Blackthorn. He had been quick to label Iron Smoke a killer. Quicker still to demand silence. But why? And why was he there so soon after the body was found? Jolene remembered how he held the cleaver without hesitation. Not like a man seeking justice. More like someone trying to end a conversation that hadn't even begun. She made her way toward town again, this time with a plan. She needed someone who'd know how long Cyrus and Tobias had worked together, and what might have passed between them behind closed barn doors. That someone was Declan Holtgrave. She found him sitting outside the feed store, a cigarette burning low between his fingers. "You're not done with this, are you?" he asked, without looking up. Jolene shook her head. "What did Cyrus have against Tobias?" she asked bluntly. Declan exhaled slowly. There were rumors. Land disputes, money owed. Tobias knew something Cyrus didn't want shared. Right before he died, Tobias was talking about leaving town, starting over. Said he had leverage. Next thing we knew, he was gone, and Iron Smoke was the villain. His eyes met hers now. "But you knew that already, didn't you?" Jolene felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "Do you think Cyrus did it?" Declan looked away. "I think men like Cyrus don't get blood on their hands unless they have to. But they know how to make someone else do it for them." Back at the barn, Iron Smoke lifted his head as Jolene returned, his ears alert. She walked slowly to him, placing a hand over the faint scars on his flank. "You were just the cover story," she whispered. "They needed a monster, and you were right there. But the real monster's still walking free." And as the sun dipped behind the hills, Iron Smoke stared toward town, where Cyrus Blackthorn stood on his porch, sharpening a blade, waiting. The town of Black Hollow never liked too many questions. It was the kind of place where silence was currency, and people who dug too deep often ended up buried beside the truth. But Jolene Ashford had never been one to keep her head down, not when something in her soul screamed that justice had been traded for convenience. And now, standing in front of Pastor Everett Malloy's chapel, she was ready to ask the question everyone had been too afraid to say aloud. What was Cyrus Blackthorn hiding? Pastor Malloy opened the door slowly, his lined face showing surprise, then concern. "Jolene," he said, stepping aside, "I figured you'd be coming sooner or later." Inside, the chapel smelled of old wood and candle wax. Jolene sat in the front pew, heart pounding like a drum. "I need to know what happened between Cyrus and Tobias," she said firmly. "I know Tobias had leverage. Declan said so. Evelyn hinted at it. And Cyrus was too quick to blame the horse." Malloy sighed and lowered himself onto the bench beside her. "There was bad blood," he admitted. "Tobias found out that Cyrus was altering land records, forging deeds. Blackthorn Ranch was supposed to be split years ago, but Cyrus found a way to claim it all. Tobias threatened to go to the authorities unless he got his cut." His voice dropped lower. 2 weeks later, Tobias was dead. And Iron Smoke, well, he became the story everyone could live with. Jolene's fingers dug into the worn edge of the pew. "And no one did anything?" Malloy's eyes filled with guilt. "We were afraid. Cyrus has a grip on this town, Jolene. Men like him don't need to kill with their own hands. They just have to suggest it. And someone else does the dirty work." As Jolene left the chapel, the sky above her had darkened, clouds rolling in over the hills. She returned to the barn with urgency, her boots kicking up dust. But something felt wrong before she even reached the door. Iron Smoke was on edge, ears pinned, eyes locked on the entrance, nostrils flared. She stepped inside slowly, heart racing. The barn door slammed behind her. From the shadows, a voice emerged, slow, cold, and full of warning. "You should have left it alone, girl." Cyrus Blackthorn stepped out from the dark, the same cleaver from before in his hand. Only this time he wasn't pretending it was for mercy. Jolene's breath caught in her throat as Cyrus Blackthorn stepped fully into the lamplight. The cleaver in his hand gleamed like something pulled straight from a nightmare. His face was unreadable, cold, set like stone, but his eyes burned with a quiet fury. "You talk too much," he said, voice low and flat. "And you dug where you shouldn't. That horse was supposed to take the blame. End of story." He stepped forward, boots thudding against the wooden planks. Iron Smoke snorted sharply, his body tense. He stood between Cyrus and Jolene like a wall of muscle and instinct, head lowered, tail flicking, eyes locked on the man with the blade. Jolene, still frozen, whispered, "He knows." "He remembers you." Cyrus laughed bitterly. "He's an animal. He doesn't know anything." But even as he said it, his grip on the cleaver faltered. Somewhere inside him, the fear had returned. Jolene took a shaky step backward, placing a hand on Iron Smoke's neck. "You used him," she said, louder now. "You beat him. You framed him. And then you wanted him dead to bury your own lies." Her voice shook, but not with fear, with resolve. "But you didn't count on someone listening to him." She looked into Iron Smoke's eyes. "You're not just a witness, are you?" The stallion let out a low, deep exhale, as if answering. Suddenly, Cyrus lunged. The cleaver flashed as he raised it, stepping toward them fast. But Iron Smoke moved faster. The stallion reared up, hooves striking the air, a wild cry ripping from his throat. In one swift, powerful motion, he came down hard between Jolene and Cyrus, his hooves slamming into the floor with a sound that shook the barn. Cyrus stumbled backward, startled. One boot slipped on the hay, and he fell hard, the cleaver clattering out of his hand. Jolene rushed forward and kicked the blade away, her chest heaving. Cyrus groaned on the ground, dazed. The fear was clear now, not in Iron Smoke, but in Cyrus. For the first time, the roles had reversed. He looked up at the stallion with wide eyes, not as a beast, but as the memory of everything he had done wrong. "You're finished," Jolene whispered. From outside, voices approached, Everett Malloy, Declan Holtgrave, and even Tamsin Coleridge, drawn by the noise. They entered just in time to see Cyrus, broken and breathless, and Iron Smoke standing tall, still, and proud. But none of them said a word. They just stared, finally understanding. The monster hadn't been the one on 4 legs. Stead without resistance, sitting in silence as the sheriff's wagon rolled through town. He said nothing, no denials, no apologies. Just stared straight ahead, jaw locked, like a man who finally knew the weight of being seen. The townspeople stood on their porches and sidewalks, watching the man they had feared for decades vanish behind bars. Inside the barn, Iron Smoke grazed quietly, the early sun casting golden lines across his dark coat. Jolene Ashford sat nearby, her hands resting in her lap, eyes distant. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of everything they had survived. She knew this wasn't over, not truly. Justice had come, but justice was never clean. Not in Black Hollow. Not when so many had stood by and said nothing. Later that day, Everett Malloy, Declan Holtgrave, and Tamsin Coleridge gathered at the edge of the pasture. None of them spoke right away. It was Declan who finally broke the silence. "We all knew something wasn't right. We just didn't want to see it." Everett nodded slowly. "That horse, he took the punishment meant for someone else. For all of us, maybe." Tamsin wiped her eyes, the sternness in her face softening. "And Jolene, she gave us no choice but to look." The town was shifting now. Quietly, subtly. People began to speak again, Stories surfaced, about Cyrus, about Tobias, about other buried truths. No one said Iron Smoke was dangerous anymore. Instead, they said his name with something close to reverence. A creature once feared had become a symbol of what had been ignored for too long. Children came to the pasture just to see him. Elders tipped their hats in silence as they passed the barn. Jolene knew that her connection with Iron Smoke was more than circumstance. It was something rare, earned through trust, through pain. When she sat beside him at sunset, he would press his nose gently to her shoulder. Not a trick, not obedience, just acknowledgment. She had listened when no one else would. And in return, he had stood for her. That evening, as the sky turned crimson, Maribel Crowhurst arrived quietly at the barn. Her eyes were red, but her voice was calm. "I was wrong about him," she said. "And I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner." Jolene nodded, accepting the apology without words. They stood in silence as Iron Smoke lifted his head and turned toward the wind, as if something far beyond the hills was calling him. But this time, it wasn't fear in his eyes. It was freedom. A week after Cyrus Blackthorn's arrest, the town of Black Hollow felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just lighter. Like a weight had been quietly lifted from the land, the people, and the silence between them. The Blackthorn name, once spoken in fear, was now discussed in hushed tones, no longer untouchable, no longer sacred. The myth had died, and truth had taken its place. Jolene stood at the edge of the pasture, her hands resting on the fence, watching Iron Smoke move freely through the tall grass. His gait had changed. It was looser now, unburdened, almost proud. For so long, he had been seen as a threat, a curse, a thing to be controlled or destroyed. But here, under the open sky, he was something else entirely. A survivor. A witness. And maybe, in his own way, a healer. Visitors still came to see him. Not in crowds, not with fanfare. Just quietly. A boy brought apples and sat near the fence in silence. An old woman prayed from a distance. Tamsin Coleridge left fresh hay without saying a word. No one looked at Iron Smoke the same way anymore. He was no longer the monster in the barn. He had become a mirror, reflecting what they had chosen not to face in themselves. Jolene never claimed to be a hero. But when people asked, she told the story as it happened. Not with drama, not with vengeance, just truth. She spoke of what she saw in Iron Smoke's eyes that day on the platform. Not rage, not madness, but fear. The kind of fear that comes from being used and discarded. And she spoke of how, when given the chance, he had chosen to protect instead of destroy. A choice not many humans could say they would have made. On the last night of summer, Everett Malloy came to visit. He handed Jolene a folded piece of paper, a deed. "This pasture," he said, "is yours now. For him. For peace." Jolene's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She simply nodded, placing her hand over the paper like it was something sacred. "Thank you," she whispered. As the stars broke open above them, Jolene walked toward Iron Smoke. He met her halfway, his muzzle brushing against her shoulder. They stood there together, girl and horse, neither saying anything, because nothing needed to be said. Sometimes, freedom isn't loud. It doesn't come with banners or songs. Sometimes, it comes in the quiet bond between two souls who refuse to be silenced.